But joining us for all the chat this morning, delighted to say, is Tom Slater, editor of Spiked Online. Morning to you.
Morning, Julia.
Just want to clarify, you were in the news only earlier this week about losing a cinema booking to do your brilliant documentary about free speech, and you'd lost your booking because apparently their values didn't include, free speech. Funnily enough, this cinema, Shane. Have you found anywhere else to put your film?
Yes, we have. So thank you for having me on the show last week to discuss this. We got cancelled.
Was it last week? Has the week just gone by?
Oh, no, it's only been a few, it feels like it's been a complete blur, certainly to those of us in the eye of the storm of this. But yes, last week we were cancelled because our premiere didn't align with the values of the venue. After a frantic search, we have found a new venue for the same time tonight, 7 p.m. in central London. We've sent it out to everyone who's got tickets or has been invited, because we've learnt that maybe publicising it might not stand us in as good stead.
What a bizarre and crazy
but
world.
It is going ahead, cancelled and then uncancelled, and thank you so much for giving us the coverage.
I mean, as you know, whether I agreed or disagreed with the film, I've watched the film and think it's brilliant. You can still see it on Spiked Online. You don't have to get the fancy premiere. You can just watch it online. But anyway, Tom, let's talk first of all about the budget, then we want to talk about Nigel Farage. Rachel Reeves, I mean, the leaks from this budget, I don't think she's got anything left to say tomorrow. And if she does, I can't think what it is. But she's told MPs in a meeting with them last night, which of course was immediately leaked, that they need to unite around the budget. But she says it's not a pick and mix budget. There'll be progressive things in it, i.e. higher rates of tax being paid by richer people than lower income people. But, you have to take it as a package deal. But now we hear that we're looking at, so savers who's pretty much only saving will be their ISA, and they'll have gone for the cash ISA, which is now 20 grand a year, which you can save 20 grand without paying any tax on it. And apparently we're looking at having that being cut from 20 grand to 10 grand because they want people to get, stocks and shares ISAs, probably just before the stock market crashes on Thursday after the budget, no doubt. People have a right to say, I want to not have particularly big gains, I just want to be safe. And, and it's a really good way of encouraging people to say, we are talking about these tax thresholds changing, which is going to drag an awful lot more people at low incomes and middle incomes into higher rates of tax. And at the same time, we're not seeing benefits being hit, and people increasingly angry about 5 million Brits on benefits not working, an awful lot of whom could perfectly capably work. If you look at the statistics across other European countries, we would be uniquely sick and disabled and ill in the Western world if that were the case. And yet, everyone's going to be hit with more taxes who's trying to do the right thing, whether it's working or saving or, improving their home. Yeah, OK, I don't own a £2 million home, but I don't begrudge people who do. But they're going to be hit with a mansion tax. What do you make of it all?
Well, I think it's fundamentally a budget which is designed to placate the Parliamentary Labour Party. I think it's become clear that even when they came in and they were talking a pretty big game about economic growth, they were talking a big game about we need to reform the welfare state, that with one kind of failure or U-turn after another, it's clear that the focus has just become on internal party management. So there's a certain extent to which Rachel Reeves won't go, but she needs to have something that looks like taxing the rich. You've got the mansion tax involved there.
The politics of envy is very strong among Labour backbenchers. Exactly,
and even though it will barely touch the sides in terms of being able to actually genuinely help the public finances or the economy more broadly, it just feels good to them. So that's something which they're willing to, which is clearly part of the picture.
But also there's an element, isn't there, where you can go, oh great, OK, the rich are being taxed more, fine. But if you are struggling to pay your energy bill right now, you're worrying about, oh God, it's another cold couple of days. Can I afford to have the heating on? And you're worrying about food and putting petrol in the car and everything else. I mean, it doesn't make any difference whether they're paying a bit more tax or not. If your taxes are going up, whether it's VAT or just your income tax, it still hits you whether they pay more or not.
No, exactly. And it's one of those things where people are really going to feel it. That's why I think even though there are going to be some things in this budget which do look like soaking the rich, that's not how it's going to be interpreted. I think people are going to see, oh, I can't save in my ISA in the way that I could to the same extent. There's extent to which people feel as if things like around the kind of salary saving schemes being taken away from them is another way in which people doing the right thing or trying to be sensible about the future is being penalised. And I also just think politically this is going to land terribly. I mean, I don't see any plaudits coming from any section of society.
But that will be people being sexist. Because we've established, because Rachel Reeves has doubled down after that FT interview at the weekend about how all the criticism and women get more criticism in public life and it's misogynistic, and she hit back yet again in this meeting with Labour MPs about misogynist. I mean, people call her Rachel from accounts to mock her from the fact that she comes across as such an also-ran mediocre nobody who lied on her CV and claimed to be an economist at a major bank when in fact she kind of worked in the back room dealing with complaints. I mean, yeah, that's why people are mocking you. It's not because you've got breasts and a womb. I mean, I'm sorry, it's embarrassing that she claims that.
It is really embarrassing, and it's also, it'd be one thing if this was a flippant line or something that they thought that they float out there in order to get some positive headlines in the press, in the left-leaning press. This is clearly what she actually thinks, and that's almost much more dangerous. Like, if you're really that self-victimising, if you're really that impervious to criticism, if you genuinely do believe, like a kind of Tumblr feminist 10 years ago, that any criticism of a woman in a position of power is de facto racist, then not racist, sorry, it's misogynistic.
Oh no, it's probably that too.
It's probably that too as well. Then of course, it just shows, it's another reason to show she's not fit for the office in which she's currently holding.
I mean, and that's the thing, and it really undermines other women as well, but also this idea, the bond markets are probably sexist and misogynistic as well. But again, they didn't have a problem. They did go after Liz Truss, didn't they? They didn't go,
Poor old Liz Truss.
Yeah, they didn't go after Margaret Thatcher. They didn't, I mean, they didn't go after Theresa May. I mean, come on, this is just an absolute nonsense.
Yeah, no, it is, and it's desperate. And I think this government realises that it's fighting for its life, really, so it's becoming more erratic in what it's doing. The fact that going into this, we were being very clearly told through various kind of kite-flying interviews that there was going to be, a couple of pennies more on income tax and all of these potentially manifesto commitment-busting pledges, and then to row those back, it's not even that it's got a plan that's unpopular and it's ploughing ahead with it. It hasn't got a plan and it's driving all around.
There absolutely is no plan at all. And we know the voters in the polls are basically saying, look, you're in the last chance saloon now, but, okay, and maybe it's for kids' time. I mean, she apparently said she's going to be here next year and the year after. Oh, sweetheart. Sorry to be misogynistic. You won't be. Rachel Reeves, I'm telling you right now, tomorrow is your last budget. Enjoy it. Enjoy it, because it will be your last. Rachel, I mean, the question is, who is going to take over? Will there be will there be another Labour leader? Will another Labour Chancellor? Will there be a general election? I mean, will there be a run on the pound? I mean, who knows? And would there be elections as a result of that? Well, there seems to be a lot of concern about Nigel Farage becoming the next Prime Minister. That's what the polls say. Pretty much no matter what, that's what the polls say. Look, things can change a heck of a lot in a week, in a month, in a few years. But what do you make of this criticism of Nigel Farage over stuff that he said at school? No one's saying he said this at university or the years after. I don't know whether he went to university or not. But I can honestly say categorically, I've known that man for many, many years, and I've never heard him say anything racist or anti-Semitic or anything like that ever. In a drunken lunch, in a pub, in a bar, never heard that at all. And it is interesting that these allegations are from people who was at school with many years ago. It's not just one person, it's a number of people. There's some teachers talking about some of the things. There's sort of Nazi salutes, saying Sieg Heil, telling a Jewish student, the Hitler was right, put you back in the gas chambers. There were some nasty anti-Semitic chants that were very common on the football terraces in the 80s as well, and some lots of bigging up of Enoch Powell. But again, a very well-respected figure for many years. If you look at the tributes paid by Tony Blair when he died, I mean, he could be one of the greatest minds of his generation, or similar words. Nigel Farage has dismissed it as playground banter, but his denial, and bearing in mind a lot of these allegations came out from Michael Crick in a book he wrote a few years ago, and in reports he did for Channel 4 before that. So these aren't particularly new. We've known about these for a while. I'm going to play a quick clip of what Nigel Farage said in a pooled interview yesterday about these allegations and what he has said in response. Have a watch and a listen.
School, categorically on the record, you did not racially abuse fellow pupils.
I would never, ever do it in a hurtful or insulting way.
That's not quite the same as not doing it.
It's 49 years ago. It's 49 years ago.
What difference to the time?
Isn't it? Well, I just entered my teens. Can I remember everything that happened at school? No, I can't. Have I said things 50 years ago that you could interpret as being banter in a playground that you could interpret in the modern light of day in some sort of way, yes.
It was a kind of denial, non-denial denial, I think is what they're called. It does sound like he's not saying I didn't say anything.
Yeah.
That was, untoward. It was 50 years ago. You can't remember everything, blah, blah, blah. I've got a funny feeling, Tom Slater, that he wasn't a very nice kid in his teenage years, and he was out to shock people and was pretty unpleasant and may indeed have been a bit of a bully to some children and may have singled them out, some of them, because of race. I don't know. Do you think what he's done is racist? Do you think he's racist now? And do you think this has any implications for him today? I suppose is the issue.
Well, I go back to that Michael Crick book, which I think is instructive because it's where these allegations were first kind of properly, deeply reported. And also Michael Crick is no fan of Nigel Farage.
Yes, actually we can safely say.
That is not a cosy biography by any stretch of the imagination. And the kind of conclusion he comes to is that there's a group of people who allege that this behaviour happened. There's a group of people who don't really remember any of this happening.
They say they didn't see anything of the sort, whereas other people are saying it was very common and he did, goose stepping in the playground, and there's other people saying never saw anything like that.
And the conclusion that, if I'm remembering correctly, that Crick comes to is kind of somewhere in the middle, which is that he was clearly, as a young man, someone who would willfully engage in this quite offensive behaviour to get a response, but that he didn't think that necessarily meant that that was kind of at the core of who he is today, or necessarily even at the time. That, I think, is probably about the right way to read it. He
concluded, actually, that he didn't believe that Nigel Farage was a racist.
Exactly.
That was his conclusion.
Which, coming from someone who is, in many respects, an arch critic of him, I think is at least a conclusion that we should listen to. Of course, if this behaviour did take place, and as you say, Nigel Farage's comments would suggest that at the very least he thinks there's a possibility that he actually behaved in that despicable fashion.
No, that's not. I mean, the party's been saying this is all untrue.
Yeah.
He didn't say that.
He did not say that there.
And he's not going to be worried that there's a video. People didn't have smartphones
exactly.
then. There won't be videos of this stuff.
But, and maybe it's just trying to be a little bit more honest in a slightly denial way. But I think it does also come down to the fact that we do have to take people in terms of their record. Does that mean the way they behaved as children? Almost certainly not.
Well, this is it.
It's not to dismiss that. It's not to say that if that behaviour happened then, now, whatever, that it shouldn't be dealt with and that it's completely despicable. Of course not. But at the same time, this is... we have to make a distinction between the sorts of horrendous things someone might have said as a young person and the person that they've been since. And we can judge them on that basis rather than... it is offence archaeology.
I was just going to use that phrase. It's people digging up something someone said. And again, by the way, someone, a very, very right-on lefty sort of talking about, women's rights, and then being accused of being a transphobe 10 minutes later that can happen. I mean, I can honestly say 100% hand on heart, there'll be no one I've ever met in my life at any age who will have heard me say anything anti-Semitic or racist. I grew up, I'm 3 years younger than Nigel Farage, but I think I probably grew up in a different world. I had, left-wing parents, and I'm very, I would say progressive in the right way, as in fact women's rights and gay rights and racial difference and things. And so these ideas wouldn't have crossed my mind. Okay, I think if you grow up, I'm not defending anything that he did or did not say. I think you grew up in that sort of, I think, quite a nasty public school boy world. I think the world was very different. I think there was just nasty sort of bullying, and some bloody awful things were said to people. I think probably quite routinely. But if you look at things like what was on TV, we're talking early 80s here, aren't we? If you look at what was on telly, some of these allegations when he was 13, some up to the age of 17, 18, but at the age of 13, I mean, you're talking about stuff on television where, I mean, stuff that would genuinely shock even reform voters now was on telly and was considered prime time on a Saturday night. I think the world was just a very different place. There's also an element where, again, I'm with you. I just think, it's a long time ago. If he said those things when he was 30, I'd be like, well, OK, I've got some big question marks, please, Nigel. And Nigel Farage, please come on any time to discuss this. But, I mean, I just think this whole idea that you are the person you were when you were 13 or even 18 is absurd. especially when you're 60. I mean, he's 60 years old.
Yeah.
People change. And if there was evidence that he'd said something similar to this, or that he had turned a blind eye to racism, that man has booted out people from more... The reason he's got so many enemies on the right is he keeps booting out people who he perceives to have been racist. So... It's, you've got to judge people on what they do and what they say in the here and now and in their recent adult history, rather than some, frankly, it sounds like pretty sodding, horrible comments, bullying comments that he did or did not do in his early teens.
No, exactly. And because Nigel Farage has been on the political scene for as long as he has, there's plenty of record to look at, and if anyone wants to take issue with any of that, absolutely they should. There is a certain point in which, if we're digging up what people said as teenagers or as young men as a means to get at them now, it does start to demean politics. It just becomes a way of trying to bring people down via any other means.
But also it doesn't allow people... I mean, these are the same people who think that, you can reform a rapist and a murderer and, and a terrorist. These are the people who genuinely think you can reform somebody who has blown up children in a terror attack, OK? And the same people will say, but Nigel Farage may or may not have said something nasty 50 years ago, so therefore he can't be a different person now. I mean, come on. No, you can't have it both ways.
Exactly, and you hit the nail on the head when you said it doesn't excuse it to also point out the context. This was a period in which racial slurs were punchlines on primetime sitcom
and they really
television.
Were.
This was a time in which racism throughout society was really rife to an extent that it really isn't today, despite the claims of The Guardian and other newspapers like that. Does that excuse what happened? No, but that at least means that it's not. It needs to be kind of looked at in that context, especially when you're talking about a young person rather than someone who's gone into their adult life taking some of that residual kind of angry prejudice.
I hate to tell you again, if you ask the views of most of our grandparents, certainly my age, they'll say things you go, oh, you shouldn't say that. I'm sorry, but that's what was normal language or, comments. I mean, this comes, by the way, David Lammy, our Deputy Prime Minister and Justice Secretary, was asked who his childhood role models were, but life, he's graduated over his life, and he names Bill Cosby, who has been accused of numerous rapes and sexual assaults. I know there's some technicalities got off of something, but the numerous number of allegations, very convincing allegations from women. But of course he's talking about him when he was this incredibly important figure on American television as the first sort of middle-class, respectable, not a criminal. Black people, particularly black men, were portrayed basically you were a criminal or a drug dealer or a pimp on American TV, and suddenly you had this middle-class doctor married to a middle-class lawyer, being a great dad and a great husband. This was absolutely game-changing TV in America at this time. And he's going to be saying, obviously, again, we can all mock David Lammy because the man is a fool, but he's making the point that at that time it's really important. Yeah, because at that time the world was very different, but now we know different things. But isn't that the whole point? No,
exactly. And I think this is another good example of how this is revealing about David Lammy only insofar as he keeps putting his foot in it. Even if you wanted to say that I really appreciated Bill Cosby's early work, shall we say, you don't say that if you're a prominent politician, because it's only going to be...
Fine, think of someone else. Yeah. Think of someone else, I know. Well, I'd love to hear your thoughts. I have to say, I asked that, the board is already completely lit up. 0344 499 1000, give us your thoughts on Nigel Farage and these allegations and his response. Love to hear your thoughts on Rachel Reeves. Again, we're all misogynist. And it's not a pick and mix budget, but we're all going to be here. I don't think anyone's going to come out of this budget least of all the Chancellor. Maybe she'll have to go back to dealing with complaints at HMOS. Maybe that's where she should have been all along. Me, the sexist. 10:26.